Six men ambushed a millionaire CEO at dinner. The waitress's hidden talent turned the tables. The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor, its fragments catching the amber light of the chandeliers like scattered diamonds. But Adrian Corleone wasn't looking at the broken glass. He was staring at the six men who had just kicked open the doors of Le Bernardin, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, their faces masked, their intentions crystal clear. Hello, beautiful souls. I hope you're having an incredible day, wherever you're watching from, whether you're cozy at home, taking a break at work, or maybe even sneaking a quick video during dinner. How are you doing today? And hey, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do me a huge favor and smash it right now, because tonight's story is going to leave you absolutely speechless. The attack happened so fast that most diners didn't even have time to scream. One moment, Adrian was cutting into his perfectly prepared Wagyu beef, discussing quarterly projections with his business partner across the white linen tablecloth. The next moment, chaos erupted like a bomb had detonated in the heart of Manhattan's elite dining scene. Nobody moves. The lead attacker's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade, his weapon gleaming under the soft lighting that had moments before created such an intimate, luxurious atmosphere. This is about Adrian Corleone, and Adrian Corleone alone. The millionaire CEO's blood turned to ice. These weren't random robbers looking for wallets and jewelry. They knew his name. They had come specifically for him. Around the restaurant, socialites in designer gowns pressed themselves against the walls, their faces pale with terror. An elderly man clutched his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. A young couple on what appeared to be their anniversary dinner held each other, trembling. The maitre d' had disappeared behind the host stand, probably calling 911, but Adrian knew help wouldn't arrive in time. 6 against 1. Professional. Organized. Deadly. But what none of them noticed, not Adrian, not the attackers, not the terrified diners, was the young woman in the simple black uniform standing near table 12, her notepad still clutched in her hand, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the unfolding nightmare. Elena Wick had been invisible to these people all evening, just another server weaving between tables, refilling water glasses, taking orders with a polite smile. She was 26 years old, worked double shifts to pay for her younger brother's medical bills, and had exactly $47 in her checking account. To everyone in this room, she was nobody. They had no idea who she really was. The lead attacker stepped closer to Adrian's table, his weapon trained on the CEO's chest. You destroyed my family's business, Corleone. Bought us out for pennies, then demolished everything my grandfather built. Tonight you pay. Adrian's hands trembled as he slowly raised them. Listen, we can work this out. Whatever you want. Money, a new deal, anything. Too late for deals. The man's finger moved toward the trigger. That's when Elena stepped forward. Excuse me, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. I think you dropped something. The absurdity of it. A waitress interrupting an armed confrontation to mention something dropped made everyone freeze. The lead attacker turned toward her, confusion flickering across his visible features. What did you say? Elena smiled, and for just a moment, something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Something that spoke of training, of skills honed in places far darker than this glittering restaurant. Something that whispered of a past she'd buried beneath aprons and order pads and the desperate need to survive. I said, she repeated, taking another step closer, you dropped something. The man looked down instinctively, and in that split second of distraction, Elena moved. What happened next will be talked about in whispers for years to come, shared in social media posts that would go viral, retold in news interviews that would make Elena famous whether she wanted it or not. But in that moment, as she launched herself forward with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years learning how to turn her body into a weapon, only one thing mattered. She was done being invisible. What hidden talent did Elena possess that could turn 6 armed men into a manageable threat? And what was Adrian Corleone hiding about his own past that made this attack so personal? The answers will shock you. The first attacker hit the ground before his brain could process what had happened. Elena's movement had been a blur, a precise strike to his wrist that sent his weapon skittering across the polished floor, followed by an elbow to his solar plexus that dropped him like a stone. But 5 men still stood, and now they were all looking at her with deadly focus. "What the hell?" one of them started, but Elena was already moving again. She wasn't the same person who had been serving bread baskets 20 seconds ago. The transformation was so complete, so jarring, that several diners gasped audibly. This was someone who moved like violence was a second language, someone who understood the geometry of combat the way a pianist understood scales. Adrian Corleone watched in stunned silence as the young waitress, Elena, he remembered from her name tag, disarmed the second attacker with a move that looked like it belonged in a military training manual. She grabbed a heavy silver serving tray from a nearby table and used it as both shield and weapon, deflecting a wild swing before bringing it down on the man's forearm with surgical precision. But who was she? Adrian had built his empire by reading people, by understanding their motivations and weaknesses within minutes of meeting them. He thought Elena was just another struggling server, working for tips and trying to make rent. He'd barely noticed her when she'd taken his order, had treated her with the polite indifference he showed all service staff. Now, watching her move with the controlled fury of someone trained to kill, he realized he'd been catastrophically wrong. Elena's mind was operating on two levels. On the surface, she was calculating angles, distances, and the positioning of the remaining attackers. But underneath, memories were flooding back. Memories she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. The compound in Virginia. 18 months of training that had nearly broken her. The instructor's voice. "You're not learning to fight, Wick. You're learning to survive when fighting is the only option left." She'd walked away from that life. Walked away from the agency, from the missions, from the person she'd been trained to become. She'd wanted to be normal. She'd wanted to be invisible. She'd wanted to serve coffee and take orders and worry about nothing more dangerous than difficult customers. But normal was a luxury she'd apparently never been allowed to keep. The third attacker came at her with a knife, and Elena's body responded with muscle memory that felt like coming home. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into a table laden with expensive china. The sound of breaking porcelain mixed with his cry of pain. "Elena." The voice came from behind the bar. Marcus, the bartender who'd worked here for 15 years, and had become something like a father figure to her. His face was pale with terror, not just for the situation, but for what he was seeing her do. "Elena, what? How are you?" She couldn't answer him. Couldn't explain that the quiet, hard-working girl he'd known was built on a foundation of lies. That Elena Wick wasn't even her real name. That the woman serving his customers for the past 8 months had been trained by people who didn't officially exist to do things that never made it into government reports. Adrian was still processing what he was witnessing when the fourth attacker made a crucial mistake. Instead of focusing on Elena, he turned his weapon back toward the CEO, apparently deciding that completing the original mission was more important than dealing with the unexpected obstacle. "This ends now, Corleone," he shouted, raising his gun. Elena saw it happening, as if in slow motion. She was too far away to reach him in time. Too far to stop what was about to happen to a man who, despite his wealth and power, was just another person who didn't deserve to die tonight. But she wasn't too far away to throw the steak knife she'd palmed from the fallen attacker's table. The blade flew through the air with perfect accuracy, striking the gunman's hand and sending his weapon spinning away. He screamed, clutching his bleeding fingers, and Elena was on him before he could recover. 2 attackers left. Adrian found his voice. "Who are you?" he whispered, staring at Elena as she zip-tied the wounded man's hands with restraints that had appeared from somewhere in her uniform. "What are you?" Elena looked at him for just a moment, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Pain. Regret. The weight of secrets that had been crushing her for years. "I'm someone who used to be very good at things I never wanted to be good at," she said quietly. Then, louder, addressing the 2 remaining attackers who were now backing toward the exit. "You have 30 seconds to walk out that door and never come back, or I can show you exactly how good I still am." The lead attacker, the one who'd spoken about his grandfather's business, stared at her with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You think you can stop us? You think one person can?" "I think," Elena interrupted, her voice carrying a coldness that made several diners shiver, "that you have no idea what you're dealing with. And I think you're about to find out." But even as she spoke, Elena's heart was breaking. because she could see the way Marcus was looking at her now, with fear instead of affection. She could see the way the other staff members were pressed against the walls, staring at her like she was a stranger. She could see her carefully constructed normal life crumbling around her like the broken glass on the restaurant floor. The person she'd been trying so hard not to be was standing in the middle of La Bernardine, covered in other people's blood, and there was no going back. The two remaining attackers exchanged glances. They'd come here expecting to face one soft businessman. Instead, they'd walked into something that felt like a trap, though they couldn't understand how or why. "This isn't over," the leader said, but he was already moving toward the door, dragging his injured companion with him. Elena didn't lower her guard until they were gone. Only then did she allow herself to look around the restaurant, at the terrified faces, the overturned tables, the shattered remains of what had been a peaceful evening, and at Adrian Corleone, who was staring at her like she was a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. "The police will be here soon," she said, her voice returning to the quiet, professional tone she'd used to take his order earlier. "You should probably think about what you're going to tell them." "What am I going to tell them?" Adrian stood slowly, his legs still shaky from adrenaline. "What are you going to tell them?" Elena looked down at her uniform, now torn and stained, at her hands, which were steady despite everything that had just happened, at the life she'd built here, which was already slipping away like sand through her fingers. "I don't know," she admitted. "I honestly don't know." But the attacker's retreat was only the beginning. Because Adrian Corleone was about to discover that tonight's ambush was connected to secrets from his own past. Secrets that would put both him and Elena in more danger than either of them could imagine. The police sirens were getting closer, their wailing cutting through the Manhattan night like a promise of safety that Elena knew was an illusion. She stood in the center of the destroyed restaurant, watching Adrian Corleone pace between overturned tables, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He kept glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Part gratitude, part suspicion, part something else entirely. "They knew my name," he said suddenly, stopping mid-pace to face her. "This wasn't random. They came here specifically for me." Elena nodded, pulling zip ties tighter around the wrists of the unconscious attackers. "The leader mentioned your business practices. Something about buying out his family's company." "I've bought out dozens of companies." Adrian's voice was tight with frustration. "It's what I do. But this felt personal. More personal than just business." Detective Sarah Connor arrived with the first wave of police, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen too much violence in her 15-year career. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and the kind of presence that made people confess things they'd never intended to say. "Mr. Corleone," she said, approaching Adrian with her notebook already out. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm fine. Thanks to..." Adrian turned toward Elena, then stopped. "I'm sorry, I don't even know your last name." "Wick," Elena said quietly. "Elena Wick." Detective Connor's pen froze above her notepad. She looked up sharply, studying Elena's face with sudden intensity. "Wick? As in the waitress who just saved my life," Adrian interrupted, not noticing the strange exchange. "Detective, this woman is a hero. If she hadn't been here..." "Mr. Corleone," Connor said carefully, never taking her eyes off Elena. "Could you give me a moment alone with Ms. Wick?" Adrian frowned. "Why?" "She's the victim here, not a suspect. Just routine questions. Won't take long." Elena felt her stomach drop. She recognized the look in Connor's eyes, the look of someone who knew exactly who Elena Wick really was. Or rather, who she used to be. Adrian reluctantly moved away to speak with other officers, and Connor stepped closer to Elena, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "Elena Wick died in a car accident 3 years ago in Virginia," Connor said. "At least, that's what the official records say. So either I'm talking to a ghost, or you're someone who's very good at disappearing." Elena's training kicked in. Deny everything, reveal nothing, maintain cover at all costs. But looking around at the chaos she'd caused, at the life she'd built here that was already crumbling, she felt exhausted by the weight of lies. "I just wanted to serve coffee," she said softly. "I just wanted to be normal. Normal people don't take down 6 armed men with their bare hands." Connor glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Normal people don't move like you move tonight. I've seen that kind of training before, Wick." Military? CIA? Something darker? Before Elena could answer, Adrian's phone rang. He answered it with visible irritation, but his expression quickly changed to something much more serious. What do you mean they found him? Adrian's voice carried across the restaurant, drawing everyone's attention. When? How long has he been? No, don't touch anything. I'm coming now. He hung up and turned to Detective Connor, his face pale. I have to go. There's been another incident. Mr. Corleone, you're a witness in an active investigation. My head of security is dead, Adrian said bluntly. Shot execution style in his apartment 20 minutes ago. This isn't over, Detective. Tonight was just the beginning. Elena felt ice form in her veins. Professional hits. Coordinated attacks. This wasn't about business deals gone wrong. This was something much more dangerous. I'm coming with you, she said, surprising herself. Adrian stared at her. What? No, absolutely not. You've done enough. You should go home, rest, try to process what happened. Mr. Corleone, Elena interrupted, and her voice carried an authority that made him stop talking. Whoever did this, they're not finished. They failed tonight because they underestimated the variables. They won't make that mistake again. Variables? Me? Elena looked directly into his eyes. They didn't know I was here, but now they do. Which means you're not safe, and neither am I. Detective Connor was watching this exchange with a growing alarm. Ms. Wick, I strongly advise you not to get involved in. I'm already involved. Elena turned to face the detective. The moment I stepped in tonight, I became part of this. And if Adrian's security chief is dead, then whoever's behind this has resources, planning, and a very specific agenda. Adrian studied her face, and Elena could see him making calculations, weighing risks and benefits the way he probably did in boardrooms every day. But this wasn't a business decision. This was life and death. Who are you really? He asked quietly. Elena looked around the restaurant one more time. At Marcus behind the bar, still staring at her with confused hurt. At the other servers huddled together, whispering. At the life she'd built that was already gone. I'm someone who knows how to keep you alive, she said. The question is whether you're smart enough to let me. Adrian's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his face went white. What is it? Elena asked. He turned the phone toward her. The message was simple, sent from an unknown number. The girl changes nothing. You still owe a debt that can only be paid in blood. 72 hours, Corleone. Then we come for everyone you care about. Elena read the message twice, her mind already working through implications and possibilities. Adrian, I need you to think very carefully. 3 years ago, what were you doing? What deals were you making? Who did you cross? 3 years ago. Adrian's brow furrowed. That was when I acquired Blackwater Industries. It was a hostile takeover, but everything was legal. Blackwater. Elena's blood turned to ice. Adrian, tell me you didn't acquire Blackwater Industries. I did. Why? What's wrong with? He stopped, seeing the expression on her face. Elena, what is it? She was quiet for a long moment, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. Blackwater Industries. 3 years ago. The same time she'd walked away from her old life. The same time Elena Wick had officially died in that car accident. Adrian, she said slowly, I think the reason they came for you tonight has nothing to do with business. What do you mean? Elena looked at Detective Connor, who was still watching them with sharp attention, then back at Adrian. I think someone's been waiting 3 years for the right moment to destroy you. And I think they chose tonight because they knew I'd be here. That's impossible. How could they know? Because, Elena said, her voice barely audible, I think someone's been watching me, waiting for me to surface. And you, Adrian Corleone, just became the bait in a trap I walked right into. The restaurant fell silent, except for the distant sound of sirens and the soft murmur of police radios. Elena could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her like a physical thing, threatening to crush the fragile new life she'd tried to build. But as she looked at Adrian, this man she barely knew, who was now in danger because of choices she'd made years ago, she realized something that both terrified and liberated her. She was done running. Detective Connor, Elena said, turning to face the officer, I need you to understand something. What happened here tonight? This was me holding back. If whoever's behind this wants to play games, they're about to learn why Elena Wick was supposed to stay dead. But Elena's decision to stop running would unleash consequences she never saw coming. Because the people hunting Adrian weren't just seeking revenge. They were trying to draw out the most dangerous operative the agency had ever trained. And they were about to succeed. The penthouse elevator climbed 47 floors in silence. But Elena could feel the tension radiating from Adrian like heat from a furnace. He stood with his back against the mirrored wall, studying her reflection with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Detective Connor had reluctantly let them leave together after Elena had provided a carefully edited version of events, but the detective's parting words still echoed in Elena's mind. Whatever you're walking into, Wick, make sure you can walk back out. Your security chief, Elena said as the elevator numbers climbed past 30. Tell me about him. James Rodriguez, a former Marine, worked for me for 5 years. Good man. Careful man. Adrian's voice was tight with grief and anger. He swept my apartment this morning, checked all the usual protocols. If someone got to him, they're better than good. Elena watched the floor numbers tick by. Professional, well-funded, patient. The elevator opened into Adrian's penthouse, and Elena immediately felt exposed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, but they also made them visible to anyone with a long-range scope. She moved quickly to the wall panel and began switching off lights. What are you doing? Adrian asked, making us harder to kill. Elena pulled the curtains closed with efficient movements. Your security chief, did he have a family? A wife. 2 kids. Adrian's voice cracked slightly. I'll have to call them. Arrange for. No. Elena turned to face him. You'll do nothing that follows your normal patterns. No phone calls, no arrangements, no contact with anyone in your usual circle. As of right now, Adrian Corleone is a ghost. I can't just disappear. I have a company to run, responsibilities. You have a life to preserve. Elena moved to the windows, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains. And if my suspicions are correct, your company is exactly what they're counting on you trying to protect. Adrian loosened his tie, the first crack in his usually perfect composure. I still don't understand how this connects to you. You said they might have known you'd be at the restaurant, but that's impossible. You're a waitress. How could? I wasn't always a waitress. Elena turned away from the window, and in the dim light of the penthouse, Adrian could see something haunted in her expression. 3 years ago, I worked for people who don't officially exist. I did things that never made it into any reports. And when I tried to walk away, they let you. Elena's laugh was bitter. Nobody walks away from the collective, Adrian. They just let you think you have. The collective? A private military contractor that handles situations too sensitive for official channels. Assassinations, extractions, regime changes, anything that needs to happen without fingerprints. Elena moved to Adrian's kitchen, checking sight lines and escape routes with practiced efficiency. I was one of their best operatives, until I decided I wanted out. Adrian sank into a leather chair, the weight of the evening finally hitting him. And you think they're behind tonight? I think someone who knows about my past used you to flush me out. Elena opened his refrigerator, not looking for food, but checking for anything that seemed out of place. The question is why now? What changed? Adrian's phone buzzed. He reached for it, but Elena was across the room in 2 quick strides, her hand covering his. Don't, she said. Not until we know who we can trust. The contact sent electricity through both of them, her hand warm against his, their faces suddenly close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. For a moment, the danger surrounding them faded, replaced by something equally intense, but far more complicated. Elena pulled her hand away, but not before Adrian saw the slight tremor in her fingers. Sorry, we can't take any chances. Elena. Adrian's voice was softer now, more personal. When you saved my life tonight, you didn't hesitate. You put yourself in danger for a complete stranger. Why? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights bleeding through the curtains. Because I've spent 3 years trying to convince myself that I'm not the person I used to be. That I could be normal, ordinary, invisible. But tonight, watching those men threaten you. She turned to face him. I realized that maybe the person I used to be isn't something to run from. Maybe she's someone worth being. Adrian stood, moving closer to her. The person you used to be saved my life. But the person you are now, The one who serves coffee and worries about her brother's medical bills and works double shifts. She's pretty extraordinary too. How did you know about my brother? I make it my business to know about people who work in places I frequent. Marcus told me you send most of your paycheck to a hospital in Queens. Adrian's expression softened. You're not the only one who's good at reading people, Elena. Before she could respond, the lights went out. Not just in the penthouse, across the entire block. Through the curtains, they could see the city grid failing in a pattern that was too precise, too coordinated to be accidental. They're here, Elena whispered, her body immediately shifting into combat mode. How many ways out of this building? Elevator, fire stairs, service elevator. All compromised. Elena moved to a window, peering down at the street 47 floors below. They'll have teams covering every exit, probably snipers on surrounding buildings. So we're trapped. Elena smiled, and in the darkness, it looked almost predatory. Adrian, has anyone ever told you that you have a beautiful balcony? You can't be serious. We're 47 floors up. I'm very serious. Elena was already moving toward the sliding glass doors. Do you trust me? Adrian looked at her. This woman who had appeared in his life like a guardian angel with a violent past, who had saved him once already and was asking him to literally put his life in her hands again. I trust you, he said, and meant it completely. Elena opened the balcony doors, and the night air rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of the city and the distant rumble of helicopters. There's something else you should know, she said as she examined the building's exterior, about why they might be after both of us. What? Blackwater Industries, the company you acquired 3 years ago. It wasn't just a defense contractor. Elena looked back at him, her expression grave. It was a front for the collective. When you bought them out, you didn't just acquire their assets. You acquired their secrets. Adrian felt the world tilt beneath his feet. That's impossible. I did due diligence, background checks. The collective is very good at hiding what they don't want found. Elena tested the strength of the balcony railing. But if you have their files, their operational records, their client lists, I'd have enough information to destroy them. Or they'd have enough motivation to destroy you. Elena swung one leg over the balcony railing. The question is, do you know where those files are? Adrian's mind raced through the acquisition, through the boxes of documents that had been transferred to his secure storage facility, through the digital archives that his IT team had integrated into his company systems. Yes, he said slowly. I know exactly where they are. Then we need to get there before they do. Elena extended her hand to him. Because those files aren't just evidence of their crimes, Adrian. They're our only chance of staying alive. As if summoned by her words, the sound of boots echoed in the hallway outside his penthouse door. Heavy, coordinated, professional. Time to go, Elena said. Adrian took her hand, and together they stepped into the night air, 47 floors above the city that had become a hunting ground. Behind them, the penthouse door exploded inward, and armed figures poured into the darkness like shadows given deadly form. But Elena and Adrian were already gone, rappelling down the side of the building on a line that Elena had somehow produced from her server's uniform, moving through the night like ghosts fleeing from an even darker past. But their escape was only the beginning of a deadly game of cat and mouse through the streets of Manhattan. And the files Adrian possessed contained secrets that would shock him to his core. Secrets about Elena's past that would change everything he thought he knew about the woman he was falling for. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath Grand Central Station smelled of rust and decades of forgotten dreams. Elena led Adrian through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had memorized every shadow, every escape route in the city during her 3 years of hiding. Their footsteps echoed off the curved walls as they moved deeper underground, away from the teams that were systematically searching every building, every street, every possible hiding place above. How do you know about this place? Adrian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The collective taught me to always have contingency plans. Elena paused at a junction, listening for sounds of pursuit. This tunnel was abandoned in the 1970s. Officially, it doesn't exist. They'd been running for 2 hours since escaping the penthouse, moving through a maze of service corridors, maintenance tunnels, and forgotten spaces that Elena navigated like a ghost returning to haunt familiar territory. Adrian's expensive suit was torn and dirty, his perfect hair disheveled, but his eyes remained sharp, focused. "The storage facility where you keep the Blackwater files," Elena said as they continued deeper into the tunnel. "Tell me about the security." "State-of-the-art. Biometric locks, armed guards, surveillance systems that would make the Pentagon jealous." Adrian's voice carried a note of pride that quickly faded. "But if these people killed Rodriguez, they'll get through it." Elena stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, running her hands along the wall until she found a hidden panel. "The question is how long it will take them." The panel slid open, revealing a small chamber that had been carved out of the tunnel wall. Inside were supplies that spoke of careful preparation: weapons, ammunition, communication equipment, cash, and multiple sets of identification documents. Adrian stared at the cache in amazement. "How long have you been planning for this?" "Since the day I arrived in New York." Elena selected a pistol, checking its action with practiced efficiency. "I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was being careful. But part of me always knew they'd find me eventually." She handed Adrian a bulletproof vest, then began strapping on her own gear. In the dim light of the emergency lantern, she looked like a different person. Not the quiet waitress who had served his dinner, but someone dangerous, competent, deadly. "Elena," Adrian said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked up from checking her ammunition. "What?" "The Blackwater acquisition. It wasn't random." Adrian's voice was heavy with guilt. 3 years ago, I was approached by someone who offered me inside information about the company. Financial irregularities, hidden debts, legal vulnerabilities. Information that let me buy them out for a fraction of their actual value. Elena went very still. "Who approached you?" "A woman. She said she worked for a government oversight committee, that Blackwater was involved in illegal activities and needed to be shut down." Adrian met Elena's eyes. She said her name was Sarah Mitchell. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. Sarah Mitchell, her handler at the collective, the woman who had recruited her, trained her, sent her on missions that had left scars on her soul. The woman who had promised Elena that she could walk away clean if she completed one final assignment. "Describe her," Elena said, her voice deadly quiet. "Tall, blonde, maybe 45. Scar on her left hand from what looked like a knife wound. She had this way of looking at you like she could see right through." "Stop." Elena turned away, her hands shaking as the pieces of a 3-year-old puzzle finally clicked into place. "Adrian, you weren't randomly targeted tonight. This whole thing, the acquisition, my job at the restaurant, even us meeting, it was all orchestrated." "What do you mean?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah Mitchell is my former handler. She's the one who helped me disappear 3 years ago. And she's the one who's been watching me ever since." Adrian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "You're saying she planned this?" "All of it. I'm saying we've been dancing to her tune from the beginning." Elena began pacing the small chamber like a caged animal. "She used you to acquire the Blackwater files, then position me at the restaurant where you eat regularly. She's been waiting for the right moment to bring us together." "But why? What does she want?" Elena stopped pacing, her face pale in the lantern light. "The files you acquired, they don't just contain evidence of the collective's crimes. They contain something else. Something I helped them steal 3 years ago." "What?" "The Prometheus list." Elena's voice was barely audible. "The names and locations of every deep-cover operative working for the CIA, MI6, Mossad, and a dozen other intelligence agencies. It was my last mission for the collective. Infiltrate a secure facility in Prague and steal that list." Adrian stared at her in horror. "You're talking about the identities of hundreds of undercover agents. Thousands." Elena sat down heavily on a supply crate. "And if that list gets out, every one of those operatives dies, along with their families, their contacts, anyone who ever helped them. But you said you walked away from the collective. Why would they still have the list?" "Because I never delivered it." Elena looked up at him, and Adrian could see the weight of 3 years of guilt in her eyes. "I realized what they planned to do with it. Sell it to the highest bidder, use it to blackmail governments, turn it into a weapon that would destabilize intelligence operations worldwide. So I hid it." "Where?" "In the Blackwater files, buried so deep in their digital archives that it would take someone months to find it." Elena stood, beginning to pace again. "I thought if I scattered the pieces across their entire database, made it look like random data corruption, it would be safe. I never imagined someone would acquire the entire company. Adrian felt sick. So when I bought Blackwater, you became the unwitting guardian of the most dangerous intelligence document in the world. Elena, check her watch. And now Sarah Mitchell has spent 3 years maneuvering us into position so she can get it back. The attack tonight was theater. She needed me to reveal myself, needed to create a situation where you'd trust me enough to give me access to those files. Elena's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. She knows I'm the only one who can find the Prometheus list in that database. And she knows that after tonight, you'll do whatever I ask. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the deception. So what happens now? Do we give her what she wants? If we do, thousands of people die. And if we don't, Elena met his eyes. We die, along with everyone we care about. Adrian moved closer to her, and despite everything, the danger, the deception, the impossible situation they were in, Elena felt her heart rate increase for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. There's a third option, he said quietly, which is, we find the list first, and we destroy it. Elena stared at him. Adrian, you don't understand. The security around those files. I understand that you're the most capable person I've ever met. I understand that you saved my life tonight without hesitation. And I understand that if we're going to die anyway, we might as well die trying to do the right thing. He reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Besides, I have something Sarah Mitchell doesn't. What's that? I have you. And you're not the same person who worked for the collective 3 years ago. You're someone who chose to serve coffee instead of serving death. Someone who sends her paycheck to help her brother instead of keeping it for herself. Someone who risked everything to save a stranger. Elena felt tears threatening. Emotion she'd kept buried for 3 years, suddenly threatening to overwhelm her. Adrian, if we do this, if we go after those files, there's no going back. Your old life, your company, everything you've built. They'd been running for 2 hours since escaping the penthouse, moving through a maze of service corridors, maintenance tunnels, and forgotten spaces that Elena navigated like a ghost returning to haunt familiar territory. Adrian's expensive suit was torn and dirty, his perfect hair disheveled, but his eyes remained sharp, focused. The storage facility where you keep the Blackwater files, Elena said as they continued deeper into the tunnel. Tell me about the security. State-of-the-art. Biometric locks, armed guards, surveillance systems that would make the Pentagon jealous. Adrian's voice carried a note of pride that quickly faded. But if these people killed Rodriguez, they'll get through it. Elena stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, running her hands along the wall until she found a hidden panel. The question is how long it will take them. The panel slid open, revealing a small chamber that had been carved out of the tunnel wall. Inside were supplies that spoke of careful preparation, weapons, ammunition, communication equipment, cash, and multiple sets of identification documents. Adrian stared at the cash in amazement. How long have you been planning for this? Since the day I arrived in New York. Elena selected a pistol, checking its action with practiced efficiency. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was being careful, but part of me always knew they'd find me eventually. She handed Adrian a bulletproof vest, then began strapping on her own gear. In the dim light of the emergency lantern, she looked like a different person, not the quiet waitress who had served his dinner, but someone dangerous, competent, deadly. Elena, Adrian said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. She looked up from checking her ammunition. What? The Blackwater acquisition. It wasn't random. Adrian's voice was heavy with guilt. 3 years ago, I was approached by someone who offered me inside information about the company. Financial irregularities, hidden debts, legal vulnerabilities. Information that let me buy them out for a fraction of their actual value. Elena went very still. Who approached you? A woman. She said she worked for a government oversight committee, that Blackwater was involved in illegal activities and needed to be shut down. Adrian met Elena's eyes. She said her name was Sarah Mitchell. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. Sarah Mitchell, her handler at the collective, the woman who had recruited her, trained her, sent her on missions that had left scars on her soul. The woman who had promised Elena that she could walk away clean if she completed one final assignment. Describe her, Elena said, her voice deadly quiet. Tall, blonde, maybe 45. Scar on her left hand from what looked like a knife wound. She had this way of looking at you like she could see right through. Stop. Elena turned away, her hands shaking as the pieces of a 3-year-old puzzle finally clicked into place. Adrian, you weren't randomly targeted tonight. This whole thing, the acquisition, my job at the restaurant, even us meeting, it was all orchestrated. What do you mean? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah Mitchell is my former handler. She's the one who helped me disappear 3 years ago, and she's the one who's been watching me ever since. Adrian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. You're saying she planned this? All of it. I'm saying we've been dancing to her tune from the beginning. Elena began pacing the small chamber like a caged animal. She used you to acquire the Blackwater files, then position me at the restaurant where you eat regularly. She's been waiting for the right moment to bring us together. But why? What does she want? Elena stopped pacing, her face pale in the lantern light. The files you acquired, they don't just contain evidence of the collective's crimes. They contain something else. Something I helped them steal 3 years ago. What? The Prometheus list. Elena's voice was barely audible. The names and locations of every deep-cover operative working for the CIA, MI6, Mossad, and a dozen other intelligence agencies. It was my last mission for the collective. Infiltrate a secure facility in Prague and steal that list. Adrian stared at her in horror. You're talking about the identities of hundreds of undercover agents. Thousands. Elena sat down heavily on a supply crate. And if that list gets out, every one of those operatives dies, along with their families, their contacts, anyone who ever helped them. But you said you walked away from the collective. Why would they still have the list? Because I never delivered it. Elena looked up at him, and Adrian could see the weight of 3 years of guilt in her eyes. I realized what they planned to do with it. Sell it to the highest bidder, use it to blackmail governments, turn it into a weapon that would destabilize intelligence operations worldwide. So I hid it. Where? In the Blackwater files, buried so deep in their digital archives that it would take someone months to find it. Elena stood, beginning to pace again. I thought if I scattered the pieces across their entire database, made it look like random data corruption, it would be safe. I never imagined someone would acquire the entire company. Adrian felt sick. So when I bought Blackwater, you became the unwitting guardian of the most dangerous intelligence document in the world. Elena checked her watch. And now Sarah Mitchell has spent 3 years maneuvering us into position so she can get it back. The attack tonight was theater. She needed me to reveal myself, needed to create a situation where you'd trust me enough to give me access to those files. Elena's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. She knows I'm the only one who can find the Prometheus list in that database. And she knows that after tonight, you'll do whatever I ask. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the deception. So what happens now? Do we give her what she wants? If we do, thousands of people die. And if we don't, Elena met his eyes. We die, along with everyone we care about. Adrian moved closer to her, and despite everything, the danger, the deception, the impossible situation they were in, Elena felt her heart rate increase for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. There's a third option, he said quietly, which is, we find the list first, and we destroy it. Elena stared at him. Adrian, you don't understand. The security around those files. I understand that you're the most capable person I've ever met. I understand that you saved my life tonight without hesitation. And I understand that if we're going to die anyway, we might as well die trying to do the right thing. He reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Besides, I have something Sarah Mitchell doesn't. What's that? I have you. And you're not the same person who worked for the collective 3 years ago. You're someone who chose to serve coffee instead of serving death. Someone who sends her paycheck to help her brother instead of keeping it for herself. Someone who risked everything to save a stranger. Elena felt tears threatening. Emotion she'd kept buried for 3 years, suddenly threatening to overwhelm her. Adrian, if we do this, if we go after those files, there's no going back. Your old life, your company, everything you've built. It will mean nothing if I'm dead. Adrian smiled, and despite their desperate situation, Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Besides, I've been thinking about making some changes anyway. Maybe it's time Adrian Corleone disappeared for a while. Elena's communication device crackled to life, Sarah Mitchell's voice cutting through the underground silence like a blade. Hello, Elena. I know you can hear me. You have 12 hours to deliver the Prometheus list, or I start killing everyone you've ever cared about. Starting with your brother in Queens General Hospital. The transmission ended, leaving them in silence. Elena looked at Adrian, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. 12 hours. Then we better get started. Adrian, check his watch. The storage facility is 20 minutes from here if we take the subway tunnels. But Elena, once we do this, we're committed. No turning back. Elena picked up her gear, her movements sharp and decisive. I stopped turning back the moment I decided to save your life. As they prepared to leave the hidden chamber, Adrian caught her arm gently. Elena, whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you tonight, even under these circumstances, is the best thing that's happened to me in years. She looked at him, this man who had gone from stranger to ally, to something much more complicated in the space of a few hours. Adrian, I know. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong circumstances. He smiled. But when this is over, if we're both still alive, I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere without armed attackers. Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling back. I'd like that. But as they moved deeper into the tunnel system, heading toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of thousands of lives, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Mitchell was still several moves ahead of them, and that the most dangerous part of their night was yet to come. But Elena and Adrian were about to discover that the Prometheus list was just the beginning, because hidden in those Blackwater files was evidence of something even more explosive, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, and a betrayal that would shatter everything Elena thought she knew about her own past. The Blackwater storage facility looked like a fortress carved from steel and concrete, its walls rising 30 feet into the night sky, topped with razor wire that gleamed under the security lights. Elena and Adrian crouched behind a delivery truck across the street, watching the guards patrol the perimeter with military precision. 12 guards visible, Elena whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Probably twice that many inside. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, pressure plates under the main entrance. You can see all that from here? Adrian asked. I helped design security systems like this. Elena's voice was grim. The collective consulted on this facility's construction 2 years ago. I should have realized. She trailed off as her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. The screen showed a video feed that made her blood turn to ice. Her brother Danny, unconscious in his hospital bed, with a figure in medical scrubs standing beside him, a syringe in their gloved hand. They have him, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. Adrian looked at the screen and felt rage build in his chest. Danny Wick was 22 years old, fighting leukemia, completely innocent of whatever games his sister had been forced to play. The figure in the video held up a sign, 1 hour, or he gets the wrong medication. Elena, we can call the police, have them put the hospital under protection. You think Sarah doesn't have people inside the NYPD? Inside the FBI? Elena's hands were shaking as she stared at the video. She's had 3 years to position her assets. Danny is completely defenseless. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a voice message from Sarah Mitchell herself. Hello, darling. I hope you're enjoying the reunion with your old life. You have 58 minutes to deliver the Prometheus list to the coordinates I'm sending. Come alone, or the boy dies slowly. Elena closed her eyes, and Adrian could see her internal struggle playing out across her face. 3 years of hiding, of building a normal life, of trying to protect the only family she had left, all of it crumbling in real time. There's something else, Elena said quietly. Something I haven't told you about the night I disappeared. Adrian waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. The mission in Prague, stealing the Prometheus list, it wasn't my last assignment for the collective. Elena's voice was barely audible. It was supposed to be my execution. What? I'd started asking questions. About our funding, about who was really giving us orders, about missions that didn't make sense from a national security perspective. Elena stared at the storage facility, but Adrian could tell she was seeing something else entirely. Sarah found out. The Prague mission was designed to eliminate me while making it look like I'd been killed by enemy agents. But you survived. I survived because someone warned me. Someone inside the collective who risked everything to send me a message. They're coming for you. Run. Elena turned to look at Adrian, and he could see tears threatening in her eyes. I never found out who saved my life that night, but I've spent 3 years wondering if they're still alive, still trapped in that organization. Adrian felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking together in his mind. Elena, when Sarah approached me about the Blackwater acquisition, she didn't just give me financial information. She gave me something else. What? A list of collective operatives who she claimed were planning to go rogue. She said the government needed to know who they were and needed to be prepared. Adrian's voice was heavy with realization. I think she was using me to identify potential threats to her operation. Elena stared at him. Do you still have that list? It's in the same secure storage as the Blackwater files. Adrian, if that list contains the names of people who were asking questions, people who might have been planning to expose the collective. Elena's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. We're not just looking for the Prometheus list. We're looking for a kill list. The weight of that realization settled over them like a shroud. They weren't just trying to protect foreign intelligence operatives. They were trying to save people within the collective itself, people who had tried to do the right thing and were now marked for death. Elena's phone buzzed with another video message. This time it showed Marcus, the bartender from the restaurant, tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. His face was bruised, his eyes filled with terror and confusion. 45 minutes. Elena, Sarah's voice came through the speaker. And just to show you I'm serious about expanding the target list, your friend here is going to start losing fingers if you're late. Elena made a sound that was part sob, part growl of rage. Marcus had been kind to her, had treated her like family, had never asked questions about her past or why she sometimes flinched at loud noises. He was innocent, just like Danny, just like all the people whose names were hidden in those files. I have to go to her, Elena said, standing up. I have to give her what she wants. Elena, no. Adrian caught her arm. If you go to her without the list, she'll kill you and everyone else anyway. And if you give her the list, then thousands of people die instead of just the people I care about. Elena pulled away from him. At least this way, Danny and Marcus have a chance. There's another way. Elena turned back to him, hope and desperation warring in her expression. What? We split up. You go to the storage facility, get the files. I go to Sarah. Adrian, that's suicide. You don't have the training. I have something better. Adrian pulled out his phone, showing her a contact list that made her eyes widen. I have connections. People who owe me favors, people with resources, people who can mobilize faster than any government agency. Elena stared at the names on a screen. Senators, generals, CEOs of defense contractors, people with the kind of power that could move mountains if properly motivated. You're talking about starting a war, she said. I'm talking about ending one. Adrian's voice was steel. Sarah Mitchell has been playing games with people's lives for years. It's time someone played back. Elena looked at him. This man who had gone from pampered CEO to determined warrior in the span of a few hours, who was willing to risk everything to save people he'd never met, and felt something shift inside her chest. If we do this, she said quietly, if we split up, we might not see each other again. Adrian stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the determination in his eyes, the way he was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his world. Elena Wick, he said softly, you are the most extraordinary person I've ever met. You're brave and kind and deadly and beautiful. And if I die tonight, I want you to know that meeting you was worth everything that's happened. Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was desperate and tender and fierce all at once, a kiss that tasted like goodbye and promises and the kind of love that blooms in the space between heartbeats. When they broke apart, Elena felt tears on her cheeks. Adrian, go, he said gently. Save those people. I'll handle Sarah. Elena looked at him one more time, memorizing his face, then turned and sprinted toward the storage facility. Behind her, she could hear Adrian making phone calls, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to making things happen. But as she approached the fortress-like building, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap that had been 3 years in the making, and that Sarah Mitchell was still several moves ahead of them. The security guards at the facility never saw her coming. Elena moved through their perimeter like smoke, using skills she'd hoped never to need again. But with every silent takedown, every bypass sensor, every lock she picked, she felt herself slipping back into the person she'd tried so hard to leave behind. By the time she reached the vault containing the Blackwater files, Elena Wick the waitress was gone. In her place stood someone harder, colder, more dangerous, someone who would do whatever it took to protect the people she loved, even if it meant becoming the monster she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. But as Elena descended into the depths of the storage facility, she was about to discover that the Blackwater files contained more than just the Prometheus list. Hidden in those digital archives was evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, and a shocking truth about who had really saved her life in Prague 3 years ago. The vault door sealed behind Elena with a sound like a tomb closing. She stood in the sterile white chamber, surrounded by servers that hummed with the quiet efficiency of stored secrets. Somewhere in these digital archives lay the Prometheus list, and the answers that could save thousands of lives or damn them all. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed the Blackwater database, navigating through layers of encryption that she'd helped design 3 years ago. But as the files began to populate on her screen, Elena realized that the Prometheus list was just the tip of an iceberg that went deeper than she'd ever imagined. Operation Lazarus, she whispered, reading the file names that scrolled past. Project Mindbridge, Blackwater Contingency Alpha. She opened the first file and felt her blood turn to ice. Operation Lazarus wasn't just about stealing intelligence. It was about creating it. The collective had been running a massive disinformation campaign, feeding false intelligence to governments worldwide, manipulating international conflicts for profit. But it was the second file that made her hands shake. Project Mindbridge contained detailed psychological profiles of every collective operative, including their breaking points, their loyalties, their potential for betrayal. And there, buried in the data, was her own file, marked with a red flag that made her stomach drop. The subject shows increasing signs of moral conflict. Recommend immediate termination before operational security is compromised. Authorization: S. Mitchell. The file was dated 6 months before the Prague mission. Sarah had been planning to kill her for half a year before Elena had even realized she was in danger. But then she found something that changed everything. Hidden in the metadata of her own psychological profile was a message, embedded so subtly that only someone with her specific training would notice it. A message that had been waiting for her to find it for 3 years. Elena, if you're reading this, then you survived Prague and found your way to these files. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you more directly, but they were watching everything. The person who saved your life that night was someone who loved you enough to risk everything. Someone who's been protecting you from the shadows ever since. Look for the Blackwater Contingency Alpha file. The truth is there. A friend who never forgot. Elena's hands trembled as she opened the Blackwater Contingency Alpha file. What she found inside made her sink into the chair, her mind reeling with the implications. The file contained surveillance photos, communication intercepts, and operational reports spanning 3 years. Photos of her working at the restaurant, reports on her brother's medical condition, records of every job she'd applied for, every apartment she'd rented, every small detail of the life she'd built in New York. But they weren't surveillance reports from the collective. They were protection details. Someone had been watching over her for 3 years, ensuring her safety, making sure she stayed hidden. Someone with access to resources that rivaled the collective itself. Someone who had been systematically eliminating threats to her cover identity before they could materialize. And at the bottom of the file was a name that made Elena's world tilt on its axis. Protective Detail Supervisor, A. Corleone. Adrian. Adrian had been protecting her for 3 years. Adrian, who had claimed to barely notice her when she served his dinner. Adrian, who had said he made it his business to know about people who worked in places he frequented. Adrian, who had been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time when the attack came. Elena stared at the screen, pieces of a 3-year puzzle finally clicking into place. The hostile takeover of Blackwater hadn't been about business. It had been about getting access to these files, about finding the evidence needed to bring down the collective. Adrian's regular dinners at the restaurant hadn't been about the food. They'd been about keeping an eye on her, making sure she was safe. In tonight's attack, Elena's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. Tonight's attack hadn't been orchestrated by Sarah Mitchell to flush Elena out. It had been orchestrated by Adrian to force Elena to reveal her skills, to create a situation where she would trust him enough to work with him. But why? What did Adrian Corleone really want? She scrolled deeper into the file and found her answer in a document that made her heart stop. Personal log, A. Corleone, day 1127 of protective detail. Elena remains unaware of surveillance. Medical reports indicate her brother's condition is stable. She continues to send 90% of her income to cover his treatment. Note, subject's selflessness and courage continue to exceed all expectations. Original mission parameters may need revision. Personal feelings become complicated. Elena read entry after entry, watching Adrian's clinical reports gradually transform into something more personal, more emotional. She saw herself through his eyes, not as a former assassin to be monitored, but as a woman to be admired. Someone who had walked away from violence to serve coffee. Someone who sacrificed everything for her brother. Someone worth protecting not because of orders, but because of love. The final entry was dated just 6 hours ago. Personal log, A. Corleone, day 1127 of protective detail. Tonight, I tell her the truth. Sarah Mitchell has accelerated her timeline. The attack on the restaurant was real, not staged. Elena's cover is blown, and the only way to keep her alive is to bring her into the operation fully. I pray she can forgive me for the deception. I pray we both survive what's coming. And I pray that when this is over, she'll understand that everything I've done has been because I fell in love with a woman who chose to serve others instead of serving death. Elena sat in the sterile silence of the vault, tears streaming down her face. Adrian hadn't been using her. He'd been protecting her. He hadn't manipulated tonight's events. He'd been trying to save her from them. And he'd fallen in love with her not because of who she used to be, but because of who she'd chosen to become. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. Elena. His voice was tight with urgency when she answered. Are you in the vault? Adrian. I found the files. I found everything. Her voice was thick with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you'd run. And because I needed you to trust me based on who I am now, not who I was when this started. Adrian's voice softened. Elena, I'm sorry. I know how this must look. It looks like you've been protecting me for 3 years. It looks like you risked everything to keep me safe. Elena wiped her eyes, her voice growing stronger. Adrian, where are you? On my way to meet Sarah. But Elena, there's something else. The people I called, they've been monitoring collective communications. Sarah isn't just after the Prometheus list. What do you mean? She's planning to auction it. Tonight. To the highest bidder. Foreign governments, terrorist organizations, anyone with enough money to buy the identities of every deep cover operative in the world. Adrian's voice was grim. We're not just talking about exposing agents anymore. We're talking about starting wars. Elena looked at the screen in front of her, at the Prometheus list that she'd finally located buried in the Blackwater archives. Thousands of names, locations, cover identities, all the information needed to dismantle intelligence operations worldwide. Adrian, I can destroy the list. Right now. Wipe it from every server, every backup. No. Adrian's voice was sharp. Elena, if you destroy that list without giving Sarah something, she'll kill Danny and Marcus out of spite. We need leverage. Elena stared at the screen, her mind racing through possibilities. Then she saw it. A solution that was so audacious, so dangerous, that it just might work. Adrian, how much do you trust me? With my life. With everything. Then listen carefully. I'm not going to destroy the Prometheus list. Elena's fingers began flying across the keyboard. I'm going to improve it. What do you mean? I'm going to add some names to it. Starting with every collective operative, every handler, every person who's ever worked for Sarah Mitchell. Elena's voice carried a cold satisfaction. If she wants to auction intelligence, let's give her something really valuable. Elena, that's insane? Probably. But it's also the only way to end this. Elena finished her modifications and began the upload process. Sarah thinks she's been playing chess while we've been playing checkers. Time to show her what happens when the board gets flipped. As the modified Prometheus list uploaded to a secure server, Elena felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. For 3 years, she'd been running from her past, trying to be someone she wasn't. But tonight, she'd learned that the person she'd become, the waitress who cared about others, who sacrificed for her brother, who chose kindness over violence, was exactly who Adrian had fallen in love with. And now, it was time to use both sides of herself, the killer and the caregiver, the weapon and the woman, to save everyone she cared about. "Adrian," she said into the phone, "I'm coming to get you. And then we're going to end this once and for all." "Elena, I love you too," she said quietly. "And when this is over, I want that dinner you promised me. Somewhere without armed attackers." She could hear the smile in his voice when he replied, "It's a date." But as Elena prepared to leave the vault, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Mitchell had one more surprise waiting for them. Something that would test not just their skills, but their love for each other. Something that would force them to choose between saving the world and saving each other. But Elena's modifications to the Prometheus list would trigger a chain reaction that neither she nor Adrian could have anticipated. Because Sarah Mitchell wasn't just planning to auction the intelligence, she was planning to use it to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. And the final confrontation would force Elena to make an impossible choice between the man she loved and the thousands of lives hanging in the balance. The abandoned pier jutted into the Hudson River like a broken finger pointing toward the darkness. Elena approached through the maze of shipping containers, her modified Prometheus list uploaded to a secure server and ready to deploy. In her earpiece, she could hear Adrian's steady breathing as he moved into position from the opposite side of the warehouse complex. Visual on the target building, Adrian whispered, "I count 8 guards outside, probably twice that inside." "Sarah's not taking any chances," Elena replied, checking her weapons one final time. "Remember, we need to get to Danny and Marcus before we make our move." "Elena." Adrian's voice carried a weight that made her pause. "Whatever happens in there, we're both walking out of this," she said firmly. "Together." But as Elena slipped past the outer perimeter, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Mitchell had orchestrated this final confrontation with the same meticulous planning she'd used for everything else. The warehouse was too exposed, too obvious. It felt like a trap within a trap. Inside the building, Sarah Mitchell stood in the center of a high-tech command center that had been assembled with military precision. Banks of monitors showed surveillance feeds from around the city, communication arrays hummed with encrypted traffic, and armed operatives moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Danny Wick lay unconscious on a medical gurney, for lines running into his arms, his pale face peaceful despite the chaos around him. Nearby, Marcus sat tied to a chair, his eyes alert but filled with confusion and terror. "Ah, Elena," Sarah said without turning around as Elena emerged from the shadows, her weapon trained on the older woman. "Right on time. Though I noticed you brought a friend." On the monitors, Elena could see Adrian moving through the warehouse, systematically taking down guards with a kind of precision that spoke of extensive training. Training that went far beyond what any CEO should possess. Surprised, Sarah smiled, finally turning to face Elena. "Did you really think Adrian Corleone was just a businessman who happened to fall in love with a waitress? Did you think his protection of you was purely romantic?" Elena felt ice form in her veins. "What are you talking about? Adrian Corleone is a CIA darling. It has been for 15 years. His entire corporate empire is a front for intelligence operations." Sarah gestured to the monitors, showing Adrian's tactical approach. "He was assigned to monitor you 3 years ago, to determine if you were truly out of the game or if you posed a threat to national security." The words hit Elena like physical blows. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Check your secure server, Elena. The one where you uploaded your modified Prometheus list." Sarah's smile was predatory. "You'll find that Adrian has been feeding information about your activities to Langley for 3 years. Every job you applied for, every apartment you rented, every dollar you sent to your brother's medical bills. All of it documented in CIA files." Elena's hands shook as she accessed her secure server through her phone. What she found there made her world collapse around her. CIA operational reports, filed under Adrian's real designation, Agent 7749. Reports that detailed her daily activities, her emotional state, her potential threat level. But it was the final report, filed just hours ago, that destroyed her. Subject Elena Wick has been successfully manipulated into revealing the location of the Prometheus list. Recommend immediate extraction of intelligence assets and termination of the subject to prevent security breach. Personal feelings are irrelevant to operational success. No, Elena whispered, but even as she denied it, pieces were falling into place. Adrian's convenient presence at the restaurant, his knowledge of her brother's condition, his perfect timing during the attack, his insistence on splitting up tonight. He played you beautifully, Sarah continued, made you fall in love with him while he documented every detail of your life for his handlers. And now, he's about to complete his mission by delivering both you and the Prometheus list to the CIA. Elena's earpiece crackled with Adrian's voice. Elena, I'm in position. Are you ready to move on, Sarah? But now his voice sounded different to her ears. Professional. Cold. The voice of an operative completing a mission. Elena. Adrian's voice carried concern now. Are you all right? Sarah gestured to one of her operatives, who moved toward Danny's gurney with a syringe filled with clear liquid. You have 30 seconds to decide, Elena. Give me the real Prometheus list, not the modified version you created, or your brother dies. And then we'll see how much your CIA boyfriend really cares about you when his mission is complete. Elena stared at the monitors, watching Adrian move through the warehouse with deadly efficiency. Everything she believed about him, everything she'd felt, everything she'd hoped for, all of it built on lies. But then she noticed something that made her pause. On one of the monitors, she could see Adrian's face as he approached the main warehouse. And in his expression, she saw something that didn't match Sarah's story. Fear. Not the tactical concern of an operative, but the raw terror of a man who was afraid of losing someone he loved. You're good, Sarah, Elena said quietly. But you made one mistake. What's that? You assumed I wouldn't notice that those CIA reports were backdated. Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke. The metadata shows they were all created in the last 6 hours. You fabricated them to turn me against Adrian. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. Elena, and you assumed I wouldn't recognize the difference between a man following orders and a man following his heart. Elena raised her weapon, her aim steady despite the emotional turmoil. Adrian's not the CIA. He's exactly who he said he was. A businessman who fell in love with a waitress and spent 3 years protecting her. Even if that's true, Sarah said, it doesn't change your situation. Your brother still dies if you don't give me what I want. You're right, Elena said. It doesn't change my situation, but it changes yours. Elena's finger moved to a trigger that wasn't on her weapon. It was on a small device she'd palmed from her gear. The device that would upload her modified Prometheus list to every major news outlet, intelligence agency, and government database in the world. You see, Sarah, while you were busy trying to turn me against Adrian, I was busy turning your auction into a public service announcement. Elena's smile was cold as winter. In about 10 seconds, every intelligence agency in the world is going to know the real names and locations of every collective operative, including yours. Sarah's face went white. You wouldn't. The chaos that would cause. It will be nothing compared to what you were planning. Elena's finger hovered over the trigger. The difference is, my version only targets the people who deserve it. Elena, don't. Adrian's voice came through her earpiece, but now she could hear him moving faster, more urgently. If you release that list, you'll start a war between intelligence agencies. Innocent people will die in the crossfire. Elena hesitated. Adrian was right. Releasing the modified list would cause chaos, would put innocent operatives at risk along with the guilty ones. But if she didn't, Sarah would kill Danny and Marcus, and then auction the real Prometheus list to the highest bidder. There's another way. Adrian's voice came through her earpiece, closer now. Trust me, Elena. One more time. Elena looked at the monitors and saw Adrian standing outside the main warehouse door. He wasn't moving to breach the building. Instead, he was holding up his hands, showing that he was unarmed. Sarah Mitchell. Adrian's voice echoed through the warehouse as he activated the building's intercom system. This is Adrian Corleone. I'm coming in unarmed to make you an offer. Sarah frowned, gesturing for her operatives to maintain their positions. What kind of offer? Adrian walked into the warehouse, his hands visible his movements slow and deliberate. When he saw Elena, their eyes met across the room, and she saw everything she needed to know in his expression. Love, trust, a plan. I'm offering you a trade, Adrian said, never taking his eyes off Elena. Me for them. You want revenge against someone who destroyed your operation? I'm the one who acquired Blackwater. I'm the one who's been protecting Elena. I'm the one who's been working to bring down the collective. Adrian, no, Elena whispered. It's a generous offer, Sarah said, but I need the Prometheus list more than I need revenge. Then take both. Adrian reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out a data drive. The original, unmodified Prometheus list. Every name, every location, exactly as Elena stole it 3 years ago. Elena stared at him in shock. How did you? I've had it for 3 years, Adrian said quietly. I found it in the Blackwater files the day after I acquired the company. I've been keeping it safe, waiting for the right moment to use it to bring down the collective. Sarah's eyes gleamed with greed and triumph. Give it to me. Release Elena's brother and Marcus first. Adrian, don't do this, Elena said, but she could see the determination in his eyes. He was going to sacrifice himself to save the people she cared about. Sarah nodded to her operatives, who began wheeling Danny's gurney toward the exit and cutting Marcus's restraints. The drive, Corleone. Adrian tossed the data drive to Sarah, who caught it with eager hands. But as she inserted it into her computer system, her expression changed from triumph to confusion to rage. This is empty, she snarled. Adrian smiled. No, it's not. It's full of a very special virus that Elena and I designed together. A virus that's now spreading through every collective server, every database, every communication system you've ever used. On the monitors around the warehouse, Sarah could see her entire network going dark, one system at a time. Years of carefully constructed operations, decades of accumulated intelligence, hundreds of deep cover assets, all of it being systematically destroyed. You see, Sarah, Elena said, moving closer to Adrian, while you were busy playing mind games, we were busy playing a different game entirely. One where the good guys actually win. Sarah raised her weapon, her face twisted with rage. If I can't have the list, then no one can. Starting with both of you. But before she could fire, the warehouse erupted in chaos. The doors burst open as federal agents poured in from every entrance, their weapons trained on the collective operatives. Detective Connor led the charge, her voice cutting through the noise. FBI, everyone on the ground now. In the confusion that followed, Elena and Adrian found each other, their hands clasping as they watched Sarah Mitchell and her remaining operatives being taken into custody. Around them, the warehouse is filled with federal agents, paramedics attending to Danny and Marcus, and the controlled chaos of a major operation coming to its conclusion. Is it over? Elena asked quietly. Adrian squeezed her hand. It's over. But as they watched Sarah being led away in handcuffs, the older woman turned back to them with a smile that chilled Elena's blood. You think you've won, Sarah called out. But the collective is bigger than you know. This was just one cell, one operation. We'll be back, Elena. And next time, we won't underestimate the power of love. Elena felt a chill run down her spine, but Adrian's hand in hers was warm and steady. Let them come, he said quietly. We'll be ready. But even as the immediate threat ended, Elena and Adrian were about to discover that their victory had come at a cost neither of them had anticipated. Because destroying the collective's network had exposed secrets that some very powerful people wanted to keep buried. And their love story was about to face its greatest test yet. 6 months later, Elena stood in the kitchen of a small cafe in Vermont, the morning sun streaming through windows that overlooked rolling hills instead of Manhattan skyscrapers. The cafe was called Second Chances, and it had become everything she'd never dared to dream of, a place where she could serve coffee without looking over her shoulder, where the only weapons she carried were kindness and perfectly brewed espresso. Order up, she called, sliding 2 plates of homemade blueberry pancakes across the pass. The customers were a young couple celebrating their anniversary, and Elena smiled as she watched them share bites and laugh together. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have believed that kind of simple happiness was possible. The bell above the door chimed, and Elena looked up to see Adrian walking in, his expensive suits replaced by jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look younger, more relaxed. He'd sold his corporate empire, and used the proceeds to establish a foundation that provided protection and new identities for intelligence operatives who wanted to leave their old lives behind. It turned out there were more people like Elena than either of them had realized. People who wanted to trade violence for peace, secrets for honesty, survival for living. "How's our favorite patient today?" Adrian asked, settling onto a stool at the counter. Elena glanced toward the corner booth where Danny sat with his laptop, working on his computer science degree. The experimental treatment that Adrian's foundation had funded was working. Danny's leukemia was in remission, and for the first time in years, he looked like the healthy 22-year-old he was supposed to be. "He's been coding for 3 hours straight," Elena said, pouring Adrian his usual coffee. "I think he's designing some kind of security system for the foundation. Smart kid. Takes after his sister." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at the casual affection in Adrian's voice. It had taken months for her to fully trust that this was real, that Adrian's love wasn't part of some elaborate cover story, that the life they were building together wasn't going to be ripped away by shadows from her past. The healing had been slow. There had been nights when Elena woke up reaching for weapons that weren't there, days when Adrian caught her scanning exits and checking sightlines out of habit. There had been conversations that lasted until dawn, where they'd shared the darkest parts of their pasts and learned to trust each other with their deepest fears. But there had also been mornings like this one, where Elena could make pancakes without wondering if they'd be her last meal, where Adrian could walk through a door without her calculating how quickly she could reach him if danger struck. "Elena," Danny called from his corner booth, "you need to see this." She walked over to where her brother was hunched over his laptop, Adrian following close behind. On the screen was a news article that made Elena's breath catch. "Former CIA director arrested in connection with collective conspiracy," the headline read. "It's been happening all week," Danny explained. "Ever since that virus you guys created finished working through their systems, the FBI has been arresting people left and right. Senators, generals, corporate executives. Apparently the collective had tentacles everywhere." Elena read through the article, seeing names she recognized from her time as an operative. People who had given orders, authorized missions, turned a blind eye to atrocities in the name of national security. People who were finally being held accountable. "Sarah Mitchell testified against all of them," Adrian said quietly, "in exchange for a reduced sentence. Turns out she kept very detailed records of everyone who was involved." Elena looked up at him. "How do you feel about that? Knowing that some of the people being arrested probably thought they were doing the right thing." Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I think there's a difference between doing difficult things for the right reasons and doing terrible things for personal gain. The people being arrested, they crossed that line a long time ago." Elena nodded, understanding. It was a distinction she'd struggled with herself. The difference between the violence she'd committed as a collective operative and the violence she'd used to protect Adrian and the innocent people in that restaurant. Intent mattered. Choice mattered. Love mattered. "There's something else," Danny said, scrolling down to another article. "Look at this." The second article was about Marcus, who had used his experience from that night to start a nonprofit organization that provided trauma counseling for service industry workers who had experienced violence on the job. He'd become something of a celebrity, appearing on talk shows to discuss workplace safety and the hidden courage of everyday heroes. "He called yesterday," Elena said. "I want to know if we'll do an interview about that night." "What did you tell him?" "That Elena Wick the waitress saved some lives, but Elena Wick the person is more interested in making pancakes." She smiled. He understood. Adrian reached across the counter and took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple silver ring she wore. Not an engagement ring, not yet, but a promise ring that spoke of a future they were building together one day at a time. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Elena looked around the cafe, at Danny working on his laptop, at the customers enjoying their breakfast, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. Then she looked at Adrian, this man who had loved her enough to spend 3 years protecting her from the shadows, who had risked everything to give her a chance at happiness. "Just one," she said. Adrian's expression grew concerned. "What's that?" "I regret that it took 6 armed men and a near-death experience for us to meet properly." Elena smiled, leaning across the counter to kiss him softly. "Next time, let's try a normal introduction." "Next time? Well, you never know. Maybe in our next life, You'll just be a customer who comes in for coffee, and I'll just be a waitress who makes really good pancakes." Adrian laughed, the sound rich and warm in the morning air. "In our next life, I'm asking you out after the first cup of coffee." "Deal." The bell above the door chimed again, and Elena looked up to see Detective Connor walking in, no longer in her police uniform, but wearing civilian clothes and a smile that transformed her usually stern face. "Sarah," Elena said, surprised. "What brings you to Vermont?" "Vacation," Connor replied, settling onto a stool next to Adrian. "First one I've taken in 15 years. Figured I'd earned it after cleaning up the mess you two left behind." "How bad was the cleanup?" Adrian asked. "Bad enough that I got promoted to deputy director of the FBI's new domestic intelligence division." Connor's smile was wry. "Turns out there's a lot of demand for people who know how to handle situations involving rogue intelligence operatives." Elena poured Connor a cup of coffee, noting how the detective's shoulders had relaxed, how the constant tension she'd carried seemed to have eased. "Any word on whether there are other collective cells out there?" Elena asked. "A few, but nothing like what Sarah Mitchell was running. Most of them are small-time operations, and we're rolling them up one by one." Connor took a sip of her coffee and sighed appreciatively. "This is really good." "Secret ingredient," Elena said with a smile. "Which is peace of mind." Connor laughed. "I'll have to try that recipe." As the morning wore on, the cafe filled with the gentle bustle of regular customers. Farmers stopping by for coffee before heading to their fields, tourists exploring the Vermont countryside, locals catching up on gossip and sharing stories. Elena moved between tables with the easy grace of someone who had found her place in the world, serving food and coffee and small moments of human connection. Around noon, Adrian pulled her aside as the lunch rush began to wind down. "Walk with me," he asked. They stepped outside into the crisp Vermont air, walking hand in hand down the main street of the small town they'd made their home. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual maple syrup festival, where Elena could be just another resident instead of a former assassin trying to disappear. "I've been thinking," Adrian said as they reached the small park at the center of town. "About what?" "About the future. About us. About what comes next." Elena felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear this time, from anticipation. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Elena Wick, 6 months ago you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me what real courage looks like, what real love feels like, what it means to choose hope over fear." "Adrian, let me finish," he said softly. "I know we said we'd take things slow, that we'd build this relationship on a foundation of trust instead of adrenaline. And I know that marriage might seem like a big step for two people who are still learning how to live normal lives." Elena's breath caught as Adrian dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life making pancakes with you, serving coffee with you, building something beautiful and ordinary and extraordinary with you." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Elena Wick, will you marry me?" Elena looked down at this man who had loved her through her darkest moments, who had seen her at her most dangerous and chosen to see her at her most vulnerable. This man who had given up an empire to build a life with her, who had traded power for peace and never looked back. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Adrian Corleone, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring on her finger, Elena felt the last of her old fears finally fade away. She was no longer Elena Wick the operative, the weapon, the woman who lived in the shadows. She was Elena Wick, the cafe owner, the sister, the woman who had chosen love over fear and found that it was the most powerful choice she'd ever made. They kissed in the middle of the small town park, surrounded by the ordinary magic of a life they'd built together. And for the first time in her adult life, Elena felt completely, utterly safe. Not because she was hidden, but because she was home. Not because she was armed, but because she was loved. Not because she was invisible, but because she had finally learned to be seen. As they walked back toward the cafe, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, saw the engagement announcement in the paper. "Congratulations. When's the wedding? I'll cater it for free, but only if you promise no armed attackers this time." Elena showed the message to Adrian, and they both laughed. Think we can manage a wedding without any international conspiracies? Adrian asked. With our luck? Probably not. Elena smiled, squeezing his hand. But I'm willing to risk it if you are. Elena Wick, Adrian said. I'd risk anything for you. And as they walked back toward their cafe, toward their life, toward their future, Elena realized that sometimes the greatest adventures weren't about running toward danger. They were about running toward love, toward hope, toward the possibility that even people with the darkest past could find their way to the brightest futures. The waitress had saved the CEO, but in the end, they saved each other. And there you have it, beautiful souls, a story about courage, love, and the power of choosing who you want to be, no matter who you used to be. Elena and Adrian's journey reminds us that sometimes the most ordinary moments, serving coffee, making pancakes, falling in love, are actually the most extraordinary adventures of all. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you amazing people, and your support means everything to me. Until next time, remember that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they wear suits, and sometimes they wear aprons. But they all have one thing in common. They choose love over fear, hope over despair, and courage over comfort. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next story.